Hello and welcome to the Apologetics 315 podcast with your hosts Brian Auten and Chad Gross. Join us for conversations and interviews on the topics of apologetics, evangelism, and the Christian worldview.
I have put many beautiful piñatas in the storeroom, each of them filled with little surprises.
Hello, and welcome to another special cornucopia episode. That's when we don't have an interview scheduled, and we decide it's time to catch up on all the knicky-knack sort of topics we want to chat about. So less formal, not scripted, and you get to join us. So, Chad, what's on tonight's worksheet? What are some of the things that we'll be trying to chat about today?
Well, we are going to talk a little bit about where have we been? Why hasn't there been that weekly podcast? I know listeners have been very concerned, and we're going to serve to quelch those worries. And we also have
Quelch?
We have quelch. Yes.
Squelch and quench at the same time.
Exactly.
Yes.
And we also have a listener who sent us in a question. So we'll be answering a question that's in the mailbag. We'll be talking a little bit about what we're reading. And also Brian has a question for you listeners out there. So make sure you stay tuned for that. And I just have a few comments I wanted to share about the recent Eric Hernandez versus Justin Schieber debate that Capturing Christianity put on. And then finally, we want to end today with an apologist prayer. And so that's what we are going to be talking about, Brian. But hey, before we start, I have to tell you, I did a thing. I did something.
Okay.
Yes. Do you remember when we had Holly Ordway on?
Mm-hmm.
And she gave us the kind of the recipe of making English tea.
Oh, yes.
Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
I did it. So listeners, if you missed that, you can go back and check it out, Holly Ordway. And she told us that to make English tea, you have to put milk in the bottom of the cup. And then you have to boil water. It has to be boiling. It's got to be as hot as you can possibly make it. Then, of course, when the water's done, you put the water in the tea bag in the cup with the milk, and then you let it simmer. You let it seep, whatever word you prefer. And, of course, I did that for 10 minutes, and then I finally tried it. This was just last night. And I do have to say that it makes tea a bit of a richer experience.
Did you notice that your accent changing at all or anything like that?
No, my accent didn't change. No, my accent didn't change, unfortunately. But that would be great because then I could say whatever I wanted and sound really intelligent. But no, my accent didn't change. But it was an experience that I would recommend to listeners. If you don't drink tea that way, it gives tea a little bit more bite. That's the best way I can say it. So yeah. So Holly, if you're out there, thank you for enriching my life through English tea.
Good. Well, where have we been? Hey, it's been busy. My parents are over visiting, and amazingly, it's filling up a lot of my spare time, and just been hectic, and yeah.
Yes, and the end of the school year for me is always a very hectic time, getting everything finished, graded, and we just finished state testing the past 2 weeks, and that always makes for kind of a stressful environment. So yeah, that's what I've been up to.
So I kind of told myself, when we rebooted the podcast that, my tendency in the past has always been like more perfectionistic, obsessed with not missing, not missing a week or something. But thank you for your grace, listeners. Part of it's an intentional trying to disconnect from having to do things perfectly.
Yes, and we do have an interview coming up soon to a very culturally relevant topic. So look forward to that. You'll have to tune in next podcast to see what it is.
Okay, well, let's go to our first segment.
What is that? It's a plane. What's it doing here?
I think it's a mail plane.
Okay, so we've got a listener question. Let's play it.
Hi there. Hello, Brian and Chad. My name's Levi, longtime listener, first-time speak piper, from somewhere between West Virginia and Ohio. And I have a musical apologetics question for you. I don't know your musical tastes, but I primarily listen to Southern gospel music, which attempts to carry on the rich theological content of traditional hymns by focusing on lyrics which are biblically correct and sometimes teach theological principles, and usually singing in four-part harmony. Do, re, Egon. My question to you, are there any songs that you know from any genre that you think could illustrate an apologetic principle? Thanks for taking the time to respond to my question. I really appreciate everything you guys do.
Oh, wow, man. When these people that call in, go with the Ghostbuster theme questions, they're just always the best questions, And Brian, by the way, I just want to point out that quote was from Ghostbusters 2. And
I know.
So
that's why we delayed for like a month to we'll play it, but we're going to give a good month before we play that.
No. So this is argument that, the Ghostbuster 2 quotes need to be included because there are some great quotes in that movie.
Yeah.
So Levi, thank you so much for the question. Thank you for making me laugh. And thank you so much for listening. So appreciate that. I had 2 songs that actually came to mind. And one of them is a song called Creed that was originally done by the late Christian artist Rich Mullins. And it was later redone by the Southern Rock. You mentioned Southern Gospel, the Southern Rock band Third Day, which is far and away my favorite band of not just Christian band, but band period. And unfortunately, they're retired. But the song Creed is literally the Apostles' Creed, which the church, of course, codified as kind of the essential doctrines of the faith. It is the Apostles' Creed put to music. And one of the reasons I like the song so much, particularly the Third Day version, is because it's just a great song musically, but also because it's just gives us a great reminder in our apologetic approach of what the essentials are that we need to be defending. And so that's one of the songs that I like a lot in regard to kind of illustrating a theological or apologetic concept of just having that idea of the essentials and defending those essentials, majoring on the majors, and of course, minoring on the minors. Another one that I thought of is strangely, I hesitated to use it, and I'll explain why. But it's also the video that goes with the song, probably more so than the song itself, and I'll explain. But before anybody turns this off, let me explain myself. But the song is God's Not Dead by the Newsboys. And the reason I hesitated to use it is because the song is so associated with the movie God's Not Dead, which I freely confess is not the best representation of Christian film, or even if I were a skeptic, I would not have appreciated the way that the atheist was presented in the film. And so I hesitated, but then I thought, well, I'm not referencing the film, I'm referencing the song in the music video. Now, a few things that I love about the song in the video. First of all, the song, of course, is referencing, that famous phrase from Thus Spoke Zarathustra from Friedrich Nietzsche. Of course, God is dead. We have killed him. And it's this reply to that of God's not dead. But one of the things I really like about the video that caught my eye is that in the beginning of the video, there are these people sitting around in coffee shops and at their workplaces or walking along the street, and they're seeing all these newspaper headlines or headlines that are coming across the television that are illustrating how scientists say that God no longer exists. There's examples of the problem of evil and things like that. And then as the video progresses, you see these believers who are beginning to look into arguments, for example, complexity and intelligent design and things like that. And as the video continues, they come to this conviction that, God's not dead. He's surely alive. And so I think that song and video illustrate how we can come to places in our life where there are truths about the world or circumstances about the world that are genuinely difficult to understand or accept. But if we continue to persevere and we continue to seek God, then those answers will present themselves. And so those are a couple songs just that kind of came to me when I first heard your question. Brian, what about you? I feel like yours are going to be way more profound than mine.
I don't know about that, but mine.
You're more musically inclined than I am. So
yeah, well,
no pressure.
I don't know
pressure.
about that. Well, I also had a song called Creed, and it's by Petra, the rock band, Christian rock band, Petra.
Yes. Are they still rocking?
I don't think so, but
Okay.
I went back and listened to their album called Beyond Belief, which I think is their best one. And man, those songs rock. As long as you're okay with that style of 80s, 90s rock, that album just rocks. But one of the songs on there is called Creed. I think it's great as far as just being one of those theologically loaded songs where you're caught both by the theology and like the emotion of the music. And you're like, I'm not saying this is me, but one might find themselves driving down the freeway with it blaring really loud with tears streaming down their face, singing the words. I'm not saying that's me, but you could probably do that with this sort of song. But the words, I'll read the words. I believe in God the Father, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son. I believe in the virgin birth. I believe in the man of sorrows, bruised for iniquities. I believe in the Lamb who was crucified and hung between two thieves. I believe in the resurrection on the third and glorious day. I believe in the empty tomb and the stone that the angel rolled away. He descended and set the captives free, and now he sits at God's right hand and prepares a place for me. This is my creed, the witness I have heard, the faith that has endured. This truth is assured. Through the darkest ages past, though persecuted, it will last, and I will hold steadfast to this creed. I believe he sent his Spirit to comfort and to reveal, to lead us into truth and light, to baptize and to seal. I believe he will come back the way he went away, and to receive us all unto himself, but no man knows the day. And now for the bridge. I believe that he is the judge of all things small and great. The resurrected souls of men receive from him their fate, some to death, and some to life, some to their reward, some to sing eternal praise forever to the Lord. And through the darkest ages past, though persecuted, it will last, and I will hold steadfast to this creed. I like that.
So here's what's crazy. Have you heard the Mullins or the Third Day?
No, I have not heard that. No.
Okay. Very similar. Yours is just an expanded version. I'm also wondering if that's like the Athanasian Creed or the Petra song. Because I know the one that the one I mentioned is the Apostles' Creed, but the Petra song just sounded like kind of an extended version of the Apostles' Creed. But regardless, I think it's really interesting how we both picked creedal songs that kind of codify those essential doctrines to the faith.
Yeah. Now, I'll probably read another song here because if I don't read this other song, it just won't make any sense why I chose it. Now, it's not theological. It's not apologetic per se, but it's sort of a testimonial sort of thing. There's a band called Thrice, and they have a song called Words in the Water. And the reason I like this song, and it's another one of those just that gets me emotionally every time I listen to it, is it gives me this sense of like the power of the Word of God to convict, transform, and lead you to Christ. And so it's almost like a progressive metaphor of his conversion. So I'll read the lyrics. Standing knee-deep in cold water, swiftly moving, somehow I knew I lost something. Wading, waist-deep, I saw a book there in the river, waiting for me to find it there. I tried to read it, neck-deep, treading water. The tide pulled me out to sea. Then with water in my eyes, the words began to rise from their page. They were beautiful and dread. I reached for them and fed on each phrase. They were honey on my lips, then a bitter twist in my side. I knew they'd lay me in my grave. Is there no one who could save me? I cried. Sinking down deep through cold water and heavy silence, shadows stirring in the gloom. What things lay sleeping down deep in the darkness, woke then to find me in my tomb. Then with water in my eyes, the words began to rise from their place. They were beautiful and dread. I reached for them and fed on each phrase. They were honey on my lips, and then a bitter twist in my side. I knew they'd lay me in my grave. Is there no one who could save me? I cried. And when I lost all hope to look, someone took that heavy book from my hands. All its weight they set aside after they had satisfied its demands. I felt white and black reverse, and the lifting of a curse from my heart. And then like one receiving sight, I beheld a brilliant light in the dark. So, yeah, I would suggest, go listen to those songs. I find them really powerful, especially if you know the words, they're powerful. But if you're reading along, if you haven't heard it and you read along with the words, the music really, for me, just makes it powerful emotionally. And, the truth that it's looking at is just profound. So those are my two songs. And thanks, Levi, for the great question and your lovely quote as well.
Yes.
Apocryphal though it may be.
No. Ghostbusters 2 is canon.
Yeah.
That's where we differ. So, Brian, what have you been reading?
All right. Well, this is one of those subjects where have I sat down and read anything? No. Have I listened to multiple audiobooks and done Kindle books, text to speech? Yes, most days. And so I thought I'd share a few things that I think have been interesting and beneficial. The most recent book I finished was called The Discipline of Grace by Jerry Bridges. And he's most known for his book called The Pursuit of Holiness. But then he's got others that sort of follow the same theme. And whether or not other authors try, they have I think many authors are asked by their publishers when they have a very successful book to make more. And then they just sort of rebrand and re-say the same things. I don't think that's the case with Jerry Bridges. The various things I've read from him, although they do keep a similar theme, they're all really profound in their own way. And this Discipline of Grace book, for me, first off, it kind of showed how it's easy to have a performance mindset when it comes to our spiritual life and say, well, today I had a bad day and yesterday I had a good day. And if I'm having a good day, that's good. If I'm having a bad day, that's bad. He tries to break us out of that sort of thinking and also starts and builds everything on the foundation of the gospel. And he lays out in a couple chapters a description and a presentation of what the gospel is and our justification and the sanctifying work of the Spirit. And it's just so powerful. As I listened, I had heard everything before, but it was like hearing it for the first time once again, and was so encouraged and grateful for the cross and the work of Christ. And then he really emphasizes how, sort of this balance and a tension between grace and our own discipline in our pursuit of holiness and things. And it gets very practical as far as different spiritual disciplines and maybe some of the pitfalls we can get into and how we approach those. But it's a really encouraging book, definitely worth the read, worth a reread, I think, as well. So that's one I would want to recommend, and I'll link in the show notes. The Discipline of Grace. I can share a couple others, but I won't go as in depth. I listened to a podcast by Wintry Night and Desert Rose called The Night and Rose Show. And they were talking about economics. We'll link to them in the show notes. Good podcast, and we've interviewed them as well. But one of the book they mentioned was called Common Sense Economics by multiple authors. And, I like Thomas Sowell when it comes to economics, and I've read a couple of his. But this Common Sense Economics was good to hear like this similar topic with just, from different authors in a really approachable way. So maybe if someone's interested in the topic of economics, that's a great starting point. It's multiple authors: Gwartney, Stroop, Lee, Farinini, Calhoun. But yeah, I know.
You ordering at some exotic food place or something?
I know, yeah, I'll have the brioche roll. Another one along church history lines is one called When the Church Was Young, Voices of the Early Fathers by Marcelino de Ambrosio. And it was really enlightening, there's various excerpts from their writings, but it talks about why they wrote and what they were writing against, what they were writing for. And so it gives you a great overview. I think that might be a good introduction for some to the early church fathers and the writings of the early creeds and things like that, and sort of what the early church was dealing with, with Gnosticism and different heretical sects that were coming about in the early couple of centuries. Those are three I would recommend. What about you? Anything you had been able to dig into lately?
I have, actually. So, first of all, I want to start out by sharing something that we might lose subscribers because of what I'm about to say. But so as I've said on the podcast before, I'm not a huge fiction reader. And I struggle to read fiction. I don't typically enjoy it because in my mind, I'd rather be reading about things that are real. I don't know. I have trouble setting aside time for fiction, but I also know that there's value to it. And I know that fiction can speak to us and challenge us in ways that nonfiction can't. So recently I made the commitment to try to listen to the Chronicles of Narnia audiobooks. And I gotta be honest, man, I know this is where we might lose subscribers. Tolkien's just better.
Yeah.
It's just Tolkien's fiction. It's like, I feel like I've read The Hobbit and I've read the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And after reading that, I just am not digging Narnia too much. And so I kind of bailed. I like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But Magician's Nephew, there were bits and pieces I liked. But all in all, it was a pretty slow burn. And then the one after Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe is The Horse and a Boy, I think it's called. And didn't love that one. And I think I'm just going to have to stick with Tolkien. And I love Lewis's nonfiction, so it's very hard for me to admit that. But I just told my family yesterday, I'm not a Narnia guy. And I've just got to accept it.
Can I say something?
Yes.
I feel the exact same way. I don't think I've ever told you. I was afraid this whole time. No, I listened to, Chronicles of Narnia, and I was like, oh, this is overrated. I just didn't get into it. I don't enjoy the world. I see the symbolism and appreciate it and things like that.
Sure. Same.
But I'm just not interested in the story. I know I've listened to one or two of the others, but I forgot them. And I was kind of like, hurry up and get this over with. And I don't have any desire to read C.S. Lewis fiction.
That makes me feel better.
Yeah. And from reading like Tolkien, I understand there's some like memes out there that can kind of compare C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. Now, go you look them up yourself. But it's funny because it's like it really compares intricacies of Tolkien's stuff. And then it's like C.S. Lewis. I'm just going to throw this obvious thing in here, It's like, I'm just going to make Father Christmas show up or something weird. I don't know what it was, something like that. And and now I get the memes because, and you know what? The other thing was, I remember in one of William Lane Craig's podcasts, he was asked something about C.S. Lewis and he thought, no, I think it's a little shallow. And I prefer the fiction of like,
it was Dostoevsky.
Yeah, Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. I think it's a better fiction. I'm thinking, what? What is he talking about? And now, finally, years later, I'm like, those comments are coming back to me. I'm like, yeah, okay, now I get it.
So anyway, I had that realization. I'm just not a Narnia guy. Listeners, I'm sorry if we've disappointed you. We love C.S. Lewis's nonfiction. His impact on Christian apologetics is undeniable, but
and if there's anyone out there who would like some Narnia books, just send us your address. So they're coming your way.
Yes. But let me talk seriously about a couple books I've been reading. First of all, there was a book recommended by an atheist friend of mine to me called Why There Is No God. It is written by Aram Navabi. And forgive me if I butchered that name. I did look up the pronunciation. And that was the pronunciation I got, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's how he pronounces it. And this is published through Atheist Republic, which, does offer some of the worst memes on Twitter, if I'm being honest. But the book is strange. And the reason I say it's strange is because there are a lot of arguments. Obviously, it's called Why There Is No God. And then the subtitle is Simple Responses to 20 Common Arguments for the Existence of God. And there are so many of the arguments in the book that I don't hear Christians making. So I just find it very odd. Like, for example, one of his arguments is this really smart scientist believes Christianity is true, therefore it's true. And I mean, Brian, how many interviews have you done? How many Christians have we had on the podcast since we've done the reboot? Have you ever heard any of them make that argument? Or God answers prayer, therefore God exists. And again, I'm thinking, that might be evidence for an individual, right? But I don't hear Christian thinkers and scholars making that argument in any published work. So the first thing that struck me about the book is that a lot of the arguments it addresses are not arguments that anyone who publishes or writes or talks on the topic is even making.
Now, I don't know the book and I don't know like all the different things it's saying, but if I'm trying to like put the best spin on it or be charitable, I would say, well, you know, maybe these aren't actual arguments. And that's in that case, if they're saying that these are actual arguments, then show me who said it, you know?
The subtitle is Common Arguments.
Oh, well, yeah. I think some of those might fall into the category of how some Christians think without thinking through their faith. They probably would think that they're right because of things like answered prayer, or they don't think through their faith or their reasons, but they do know that there are smart scientists who are Christians, and so that affirms them in their belief. So, you know, I don't think anybody would make those arguments, but maybe that's sort of where they're coming from. I don't know.
I think the book is a little uneven in the sense that it wants to be a project of addressing arguments for the existence of God, but then even when it does attempt to address the kind of the key arguments, whether it be the fine-tuning argument or the cosmological argument, it doesn't necessarily represent the best versions of the argument. There have been a lot of times where I've seen just straw men, if you will, or let's pick the easiest version of the argument to present because it seems much easier to tear it down. There have been a lot of times I've written in the margin, but who argues that way? ? And so it's been a bit disappointing in the sense of just one of the things I've tried to do. And you know, we did the 2-part podcast where we talked about kind of what I think the best atheist objections are to, or atheist arguments are. And if I were an atheist, what arguments I would defend is, I guess one of the things I've learned from that is I do want to represent arguments fairly because I do ultimately want to know what's true. And I guess I was just disappointed to see some of the kind of mishandling of what I think actually Christianity claims and what Christians actually argue. But I am looking forward to talking to my friend about it because obviously I have more to learn, and I'm interested to see what arguments he thinks are good in the book. And so if anything, it'll be a great springboard for discussion. Now, I do want to kind of tell a funny story about the book. I bought the book about 2 years ago, and I tweeted out, you know, hey, starting this book today. And Jeffrey J. Louder of Secular Outpost, who has debated Frank Turek, and he writes on Craig's arguments. He's a big defender of Paul Draper. I mean, this guy's sharp. And he wrote to me and said something along the lines of, why are you reading that crap?
Yeah.
So I actually put the book down because I thought, whoa, if Jeffrey J. Louder's telling me it's bad, you know, then it can't be very good. But then, of course, when my friend recommended it, he kept referring to this atheist that he read this book by, because this guy's a former Muslim who turned atheist. And I finally just was like, all right, what book was it? And when he sent me the title, I thought, oh, okay. So thankfully I already had it. But anyway, it's just a good lesson for me to want to represent people fairly, and that we should all strive to do that. And we're all in different places in our learning, and I understand that.
Is that book sort of like the atheist equivalent of a book with like Adam and Eve riding dinosaurs on the Christian side?
That's a good question. I think in places it is. Oh. I think in places it is. There are other places where it at least tries to engage the argument. But there's enough places to where it causes some real kind of red flags about how much did the author really strive to understand the Christian position before he attempted to critique it. You know, one thing for all of us is it's very easy to defeat an argument if we, you know, represent the weakest version of it, or we offer the weakest version of it. And so that's why we want to try to steel man instead of straw man. And I'm learning to do that too. The other book I picked up is Pocket History of the Church by Jeffrey Bigham. And this is a book of kind of, it's in that IVP series of pocket guides. There's also the Peter Kreeft Apologetics one. And it's the same, looks the same, has the same kind of design to it.
Yeah, I love those.
And yes. And so he picks kind of the key moments in Christian history. And right now in the book, he's talking about like, why is history valuable to Christians and what can we learn from it? Why should we know it? And so I'm looking forward to digging into that. So that's some stuff I'm reading.
Cool. Well, we've talked about what we've been reading, but what about what we've been watching? Chad, would you like to start?
Yeah. So I know you're not a big Marvel Universe guy.
No.
And I actually, since Spider-Man No Way Home, they've put out some pretty big stinkers, and you and I have talked about that. But one franchise that they have within the franchise is Guardians of the Galaxy. And I do think both of those films are really good. I absolutely love the team. I love the characters. And I was really excited for this one. The whole family was. And we went to see it, and I will say that I liked it, and it's better than what they have been putting out. But I didn't love it like the first two. So in other words, the first two I could probably watch every day and never get tired of them. They're very funny. They're very entertaining. This one, if, I might watch it one more time, and then if I never see it again, it's okay. They still have their funny moments. The story is interesting, even though it's a little disjointed. But what was interesting in it is that the villain in the movie is called the Higher Evolutionary. And what the Higher Evolutionary is trying to do is he's trying to create this perfect society by genetically modifying creatures. And he's trying to make the most peaceful creatures that can live in harmony where, there's no carnivores. There's none of this. He almost makes these animal kind of humanoids. And there's this one scene. I really like this line, just thinking about God's existence and theology and things like that. There's this one line where this woman says something to the Higher Evolutionary, like, isn't that God's job? Or she references God or something. And he looks at her indignantly and he says, there is no God. That's why I stepped in. And I thought about that line. And the reason why it intrigued me, the more I thought about it, is because I think sometimes, whether you're a Christian or not, now, obviously, Christians believe there's a God, so that's a big difference, right? But whether there's a God or not, sometimes I think if things are not going our own way in our life, right, that we can step in as if to say, God's not doing his job, so I need to step in and I need to take the reins myself. And so it struck me in the way of, like, in my own Christian walk, how often do I unknowingly, I would never think this consciously and think it's a good thing, but how often do I, in a way of being unaware of it, if things aren't going my way, I kind of say, there is no God. That's why I stepped in. God's not doing what I think he should be doing. So I'm taking the reins myself. And then also in the sense of, from an atheist perspective, that I think that statement is true, right? There is no God. I am God in a sense of my own choices and my own life, and I am my own authority, right? That's why I stepped in. I'm stepping in and doing what I want because there is no God. Now, I am, first of all, not saying that characterizes every single atheist. That's not what I'm saying. Secondly, I'm not saying that necessarily I'm going to do what I want means that they're going to be immoral, because there are atheists I know who are more moral than I am. But I just thought it was a theologically rich statement when he said that. From both a Christian and a non-Christian perspective.
Yeah, it's good insight.
Yeah, so I saw Guardians. It was fun. I will say to parents who are listening, if you're like me, now my girls, my youngest is almost 15 and my oldest is 16. They're 16 months apart. It's a darker film than the first two.
Like Toy Story 3?
A little more Nat.
Okay.
And there's one scene in particular that is a brief glimpse, but it's a little graphic. So, and my girls were fine, but again, they're 15, 16, right? So if you have kids that are younger than that and they're sensitive to those things, I would encourage you to watch it first and kind of make a good judgment. Not trying to tell you how to parent, just offering like, we're doing this together. And that's kind of my fatherly advice for you. So how about you, Brian? What are you watching?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It confirms I will not be watching Guardians of the Galaxy anytime soon. So something else can step in. And in this case, remember when we interviewed Steve Kozar, who runs the YouTube channel, The Messed Up Church?
Yeah, that was a great interview.
I like going through watching his videos. I think he has a lot of interesting insights on some of the like teachings and doctrines that he's critiquing and practices that are problematic and should be thought about carefully. Mm-hmm. Along those lines, there's another ministry that you're probably familiar with, Justin Peters.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
I suppose this genre of content would be called like discernment ministries.
Yes.
They're not like apologetics. They're more like, hey, here's where your doctrine's getting kind of funky and
very needed. Very needed.
Yeah. So anyway, I thought, well, I'll subscribe to his because I want to keep track of what he's doing. And one of the things that I had found when I came across Steve Kozar's stuff was he had done research into what you'd call, quote unquote, the God's generals. Steve interviewed me for his YouTube channel, which was yet to be released, but he was asking me about my former experiences in New Apostolic Reformation type churches and things like that. And I had mentioned to him, hey, thanks for your content on quote unquote God's Generals, written by Robert Learden, which was an influence for me learning about that and getting into that sort of environment where it basically is a history of Pentecostal and charismatic leaders and painting them as, miracle workers and healers and people who cause revival. So they're kind of like revivalists. So I just took that to be, accurate history. Well, anyway, long story short, Justin Peters has a video which he is entitled History of the Pentecostal Charismatic Movement. And watching that, let's say there's 12 of these God's generals, quote unquote. Well, he kind of goes through and says, well, here are these main leaders within the movement. Here's what Robert Learden has taught about them, but here's what he didn't teach you. And basically goes on to show how many of them were in trouble with the law, who were teaching clearly heretical doctrines.
Really?
There was probably 5 to 7 of them who were calling themselves Elijah. Really troublesome teachings, troublesome practices. And it seemed to like 90% of them had some sort of moral failure in the area of sexuality, affairs and things like that. So, yeah, I found it really helpful to watch that because it was information that was not presented. I mean, if we're doing history about leaders of the past, I want to know the full story. I would have liked to known from Robert Learden back in the day, the full story about these people who are supposedly generals within the Pentecostal charismatic movement. So, it could make me think differently about credibility of their teachings and make me question their credibility or an authority, or maybe even the validity of their teachings. Because if this is one of the things Justin Peters said is, if this is such a great move of God and these are the generals, why are all the generals moral failures, hypocrites, and heretics? Because what is the fruit of this quote unquote ministry, these moves of God, quote unquote? So I'll link to that in the show notes. I'm not taking shots at charismatics or Pentecostals. I'm only saying that this is more complete history that I was not taught and what I would have liked to known.
Well, yeah. And I think, to be fair, I mean, listeners who have listened to our NAR podcasts with Doug Guyvet and Holly Pivick, and of course your experiences with that, we don't at all attack our charismatic or Pentecostal brothers and sisters. What we struggle with are the abuses of that. And we are going to address those unapologetically. But that's what I hear you saying is you're talking about kind of the partial history, a false narrative, and also kind of the abuses of people within that camp.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, I've been doing further reading and researching into like the nature of spiritual experiences, how, sort of like the epistemology behind those things. What are the alternative possible causes of certain healings and things, and psychosomatic healing and charlatan healing and that sort of a thing. The history of tongues throughout the life of the church. That's an interesting topic. Anyway, there's some more interesting reading that can go along with that sort of rabbit hole. So,
yeah,
what are we watching? That was an interesting one to watch, the history of the Charismatic and Pentecostal movement by Justin Peters. A link to Justin Peters' channel, and you can judge for yourself. There's various other things there, but I appreciate his heart and his commitment to truth. And, again, you can sift those things for yourself and let them inform your research. Now, a listener, along the lines of New Apostolic Reformation, or NAR, have you had an experience coming out of NAR type churches or ministries? This is not a Ghostbusters commercial.
Sorry,
Chad,
man.
I know you're laughing.
As soon as you said, have you?
Have you seen a spook, specter, or ghost?
Sorry, it just popped in there.
Oh, I know.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. I distracted him, listener. That was my fault. Okay, go ahead.
So
go ahead. I'm so sorry.
The episodes that we've gotten the most feedback on have been the ones regarding the New Apostolic Reformation, or NAR. Both the interviews with Doug Guyvett and Holly Pivick on their books, for instance, God's Super Apostles, Counterfeit Kingdom, and the like. And also the one where I recounted my experiences with NAR. Well, I wasn't planning on going too deeply with that, but in the future, when I release that interview that I did with Steve Kozar's channel, The Messed Up Church, where I recount my experiences, then you'll hear more of that as well. But I got various emails from people saying that they've been through similar experiences with those teachings, and places that turned very negative for them when their church shifted to embrace this sort of teaching. One gentleman recently contacted me with, PowerPoints and presentations that he's prepared after he's done a lot of heavy research into this movement and its core teachings and stuff. Very helpful stuff, because things did not turn out positive in his experience of those things. Now, your mileage may differ, but if you're listening and you too have had what we'd call an NAR experience, and you're willing to share a bit about it, would you send me an email? It doesn't have to be a long and drawn out, unless you're, that sort of thing is cathartic and helpful for you. But I have no plans to read them on the podcast. And if I wanted to do that, I would ask you about that. But it's strictly for my own continued research and learning about what people have experienced, positive or negative, and maybe how you've dealt with it, if it's something you've come out from. So I'm just trying to get a little bit more information, like how widely has that affected people in a negative way? What were the first clues that something wasn't exactly kosher going on at your church or ministry? So if you wouldn't mind sharing that, you can send it to podcast@apologetics315.com. Again, I'm not planning on reading that. If I want to know more or use that in any way, I would contact you and consult you if you do that. So it's confidential in the meantime.
And remember, listener, we're ready to believe you. Now, Brian, we dare not leave this segment of what we have been watching without allowing the listener a little window into what Brian Auten thought of Mandalorian Season 3.
Yes. Well, I've expressed these thoughts in rants on text messages to my friend Wesley. If you're out there, we're listening, Wes. Thank you for being that sounding board. Anyway, yeah, Mandalorian Season 3. I'm no longer a proud Mandalorian fan. Season 1, great. Season 2, great. Season 3, what happened? It's just went off the rails. Who's writing this? How many people are getting their agenda pushed in? Silly cameos from actors that don't add anything. Side quests of characters you forgot about, and you're like, what's the point of this? It's just pathetic, and Mando needs to be rescued. He's no longer the prime character. He's not the hero. He's sort of like tagging alongside the woman protagonist. Then we have Grogu, Baby Yoda, sort of stayed on to be the cute factor. It's just I have no desire other than morbid curiosity to watch further because it's like from episode to episode, I'm like, oh, I don't know what we're doing here. I don't care about Mandalore. I don't care about Grogu anymore. They're not doing anything with, Mando anymore. And it's just, there was just so many stupid things that happened that were just, are you serious? Alligators jumping out and killing people.
I'm sorry, man. I know you really, really dug the first 2 seasons.
Yeah.
So
those were the way.
I'm sorry.
Those were the way.
Those were the way. Yes.
This is not the way anymore.
They have lost their way.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, sorry fans if that disappointed you, but Brian's got to tell it like it is.
I'm only in this for the truth.
Exactly. So, hey, speaking of which, I think not everybody would agree with me, but I think a great way to introduce people to big concepts and important questions about what is true is through debates. And a recent debate I watched that I want to recommend, I cannot recommend it highly enough to listeners, was put on by Cameron Bertuzzi at Capturing Christianity between Eric Hernandez, who I knew who Eric Hernandez was, but had never really watched a lot of his content or read a lot of his stuff. So this was really my first interaction with his stuff. And also Justin Schieber, who I was familiar with from years ago when he did the Reasonable Doubts podcast and Real Atheology. And he took a kind of a sabbatical. He took like a break from philosophy, and he is back. And honestly, I think we're all the better for it because he follows a principle from atheist William Rowe, friendly atheism. You don't get name calling or straw manning, or he is interested in sincere engagement, really seeking to understand. So anyway, the debate topic was on, does God exist? Dr. Hernandez argued that the existence of evil, the existence of knowledge and rationality, and the existence of a soul offer a better or much more likely on theism. And he also claimed that any claims that Schieber made contrary to that actually proved his case. And Justin Schieber, he argued that evolutionary evil is experienced by sentient beings who are non-moral agents, and this is more likely on naturalism, I'll say, or let's just say the view that God does not exist. He also argued that the hostility of the universe to beings that are moral agents is more likely on naturalism, and he argued that divine hiddenness was more likely on naturalism. Now, Brian, I will say, I just have a few comments on the debate. I just want to recommend it to listeners. We're going to make sure we include it in the show notes. But I did want to say that one of the reasons that, I sent you the debate was because Hernandez a few of his responses to divine hiddenness were some of the ones that you have kicked around in the past, including that we see God and Jesus hiding themselves in the scriptures. Mm-hmm. And he did offer that and that God could have morally justifiable reasons for doing that. And so I knew you'd appreciate that. So a few things about the debate. First of all, listener, whether you're a Christian, an atheist, whatever beliefs you have, this is the model for engagement. It isn't about attacking one another personally. It is about sincere engagement, trying to understand one another's view, admitting when you disagree, but doing so in a way that still allows your opponent to keep their dignity. And so I was just so encouraged by that. But probably the most interesting part of the debate for me, and this has been a topic of interest, especially since we read Paul Gould's book and interviewed him, A Good and True Story. And also when William Lane Craig debated Eric Wielenberg. In the debate, when they were talking about moral truth. So both of them are moral realists in the sense that they both believe that moral truths exist. Now, Hernandez obviously believes that moral truths are best grounded in the existence of God, which most Christian philosophers would obviously agree with him. There's a few exceptions like Richard Swinburne or somebody like that. Now, Schiebert's view is that they're almost like these Platonic concepts that are just kind of there. They're these, moral truths are abstract objects, and that's just the bottom, that you don't need anything else. And so What was interesting in the open discussion is that Hernandez was pressing Schieber on the idea of these moral obligations. And he was saying, yeah, but if you're not obligated to things, you're obligated to persons. Mm. And I just, that part alone made the debate worth watching, because I have trouble with that concept of how do we, like, even let's entertain the fact that there were these abstract objects, right, that are moral truths that are just out there. But if there's no I'm not obligated to abstract objects. And so in what sense can we have moral obligations? Now, I'm not saying there's not an answer to that. I'm just saying that's where I'm at in my current thinking. And so anyway, just want to recommend the debate. Want to encourage people to follow their model of how to engage, and please watch how they attempt to genuinely understand one another. There's no gotchas. There's no, I'm trying to trap you and make you look bad. There's none of that. It's just, and also the last thing I want to say, one of the things they did that I thought was great is they exchanged opening statements ahead of time.
Yeah.
And that made for such a substantive discussion. And every debate I've seen where debaters have done that, almost every time the debate is better. And so that was great to see. So anyway, want to recommend the debate. We'll put it in the show notes. Any thoughts or?
No, I look forward. You've sold me on it. I'm going to go watch it.
So Brian, you'll remember back when we did a podcast, and I don't remember the exact title. You might, but we did it with Jacob from Saft Apologetics. And essentially the idea behind the podcast was things that apologists shouldn't do. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of our way of hopefully contributing to the discussion and offering ideas to Christians and fellow apologists about how we needed to conduct ourselves in a way that honored Christ. That was essentially the theme of the podcast. Well, after we interviewed Andy Bannister and I had the opportunity to read his book, How to Share Jesus Without Sounding Like an Idiot, or no, looking like an idiot, he referenced a passage in the New Testament in the book of Colossians. And I'm going to read it, and then I want to share. This is Paul, and Paul is writing obviously to the church in Colossae, and they're dealing with some heretical teaching. And he writes this to them. He says, devote yourselves. Oh, and excuse me. This is Colossians 4, verses 2 through 6. And this is, again, Paul. He says, devote yourselves to prayer, keeping alert in it with an attitude of thanksgiving, praying at the same time for us as well, that God will open up to us a door for the word, so that we may speak forth the mystery of Christ, for which I also have been imprisoned, that I may make it clear in the way I ought to speak. Conduct yourselves with wisdom toward outsiders, making the most of every opportunity. Let your speech always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person. So as I was thinking on that, and as I read Andy's book, I couldn't help but be convicted, if I'm being honest, about how I do struggle with, I get into the busyness of my job and the hectic pace of it, and I forget the greater purpose of being there. And after I read that, which is obviously to model Christ and to share Christ, and I read that passage from Colossians, and I thought, I am going to use that to model a prayer after. And I'm kind of calling it the Apologist prayer. And I intend to share it on the blog, Truth Bomb, at some point, maybe this week. But what I want to make sure before I read it, I want listeners to understand that I'm not saying this is like an exegetical version of what Paul is writing there. What this is me taking the ideas and concepts and basing a prayer on what Paul says. Mm-hmm. So it's not word for word. I just want to make sure, in case anybody, wants to say, oh, that's not exactly what he said there. I'll probably say, well, yeah, you're absolutely right. I modified it so it could be in a prayer, right? So when you hear the themes in here, I just want to encourage listeners that I think we would find ourselves as a body, and I'm not being preachy here, I'm preaching to myself. We would find ourselves in a much better place if we conducted ourselves in the way that Paul writes there in Colossians and what this prayer expresses. And so this is a prayer I wrote that, again, I wrote it for me, but I also wanted to share it with others and just think about what engagement would be like. I saw some of these things that are in the prayer from Eric Hernandez in his debate with Justin Schieber. But it says this is a prayer. It says, "Remind me to be quick to pray, with an alert mind and a thankful heart. Please give me opportunities to speak the truth about Christ to those who do not know him. Teach me to proclaim the message as clearly as I should. Work in me so that I may live wisely among those who do not believe, so that I will make the most of each opportunity. Ensure that my conversations are gracious and attractive, and please provide me with the wisdom I will need to thoughtfully respond to each person." And so that prayer for me, a few things I like about it is it keeps in front of me the ultimate goal of what I'm doing, no matter where I am, but also it invites God to do this work through me, because as Jesus makes clear in John 15, without him, we can do nothing. And so I just wanted to offer that as hopefully an encouragement, and hopefully it will be.
Well, I think that's a good thing to end on. I saw that you had on there a prayer there, and I had dug up the Apologist's Evening Prayer by C.S. Lewis. But seeing we've already thrown Lewis under the bus once, I'll throw him under again, because I think that prayer is better than his poem. That's beautiful. It's simple. It's scriptural, and it's from the heart. Excellent. We'll put that in the show notes. And thank you, Chad. And thank you for everyone listening and continuing to listen, and also for your feedback. Remember to shoot me an email if you want to share your sort of NAR experience, podcast at apologetics315.com. Or if you have any recommendations or people that you would like us to interview in future, just let us know. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you have a question you'd like us to address or just a message for us, feedback, good or bad, you can either email us at podcast@apologetics315.com or leave a voice message for us using SpeakPipe. Just go to speakpipe.com/apologetics315 to leave us a message. And remember, if you include a Ghostbusters quote in your question, we guarantee that we'll read it on the podcast. We also ensure up to 50% better quality answers. Also, if you've enjoyed today's podcast, please leave a review in iTunes or the podcast platform of your choice. And please share this episode with a friend if you found it useful. Remember, you can find lots of apologetics resources at apologetics315.com, along with show notes for today's episode. Find Chad's apologetic stuff over at Truthbomb Apologetics. That's truthbomb.blogspot.com. This has been Brian Auten and Chad Gross for the Apologetics 315 podcast, and thanks for listening.